from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Brown-haired albino was unbuttoning his coat, his eyes on Cermak, who was shaking hands with Roosevelt.
Well, it's wonderful to see you, Tony. A lovely gesture.
I just wanted to remind you and your administration that you have my full and enthusiastic support.
The albino assassin was reaching under his coat, but I grabbed his arm and pulled it away, and his hand came back empty, the gun still under his arm as his coat flapped. I buried a fist in his belly and doubled him over. And when he came up, the snout of my 9mm stared him in the face.
You got you this time, fucker!
Sounded like firecrackers, and the muzzle flash above the crowd looked like fireworks, but this was something else. Blurred figures in the crowd were falling, and a stubby, bushy-haired brown little man in a white shirt standing up on a bench was swarmed like a come-to-Jesus meeting got out of hand. Meanwhile, the ex-blonde was pulling away, and I swung at him, and he went down, unconscious, as the mass of people around us were heading to my right. I moved against the tide towards Cermak, pushing, shoving, and got to that touring car where Miller and Lang were crouched over the fallen Cermak, red spreading from his left side under his unbuttoned suit coat.
Where? Where were the goddamn bodyguards?
I had the blonde, Your Honor. He didn't fire the round. Some bushy-haired little creep.
This was no time to tell him he'd been shot by his son-in-law's gardener.
What the hell? They got me after all, Heller.
The crowd was turning into a mob. Miller, Lang, and I were hovering over Cermak in the quiet of the storm.
Heller, get your people out of the way. We need to move the president and his vehicle out of here. For Christ's sakes, Cermak's been shot. Take him with you. Get him to a hospital.
Roosevelt, sitting in back, heard me.
Put Tony in here and get us the hell out.
The shooter's big revolver was clicking on an empty chamber now. But that must have had an 8-round rod, as I found myself on a battlefield where bleeding audience members wandered like wounded warriors, helped by their dazed loved ones.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination and the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, moi, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm robcasting at you right here from the Robservatory in a very stormy part of sunny Southern California, which is not so sunny, but heck, we always need the water, and Mount Mammoth needs some snow. So I'm coming at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 173. My God. We're heading right into season 9. So for those of you who come late and maybe never watch this show again, White Devils is a film that I produced, directed by Gabriel Bologna and adapted by Damon Shalit, who stars in the movie, from Rosa DeWitt's play African Gothic. She's a famous South African playwright who sadly passed away in 2012. You can go get it and you can rent it. You can watch it for only $9.99. Support independent cinema and support things made by humans, because apparently, there's a voice on the interwebs that's mad at me for saying the obvious, that AI is here. But anyway, and of course our audio drama that I directed, edited, and produced, written by the great Max Allan Collins, who wrote the graphic novel that Road to Perdition was based on. You can go to truenoir.co and get that right now. It's 4.5 hours long. It stars people like the great Michael Rosenbaum, David Strathairn, Anthony LaPaglia, Katie Sackhoff, and many, many more. Your favorite Yankees fan, Nicholas Turturro's even in it. So check it out. Support our work here. We don't just yammer away on the interwebs. We make things. We make films. We make audio dramas. We're going to do a short story contest. More on that, not in this episode. And also, if I might beseech upon all of you that have all this extra money in our our inflated times, the Doug Drexler documentary, Trek Star, is in its last few days of raising money over on Kickstarter. I really hope everybody watches. I'm very overjoyed and touched that people seem to really like the last two Robservations, where I interviewed one of my favorite people in the world, Doug Drexler. You can tell from the audio, the interview, that what a guy. Starts out as a huge fan of Star Trek, ends up working at the Federation Trading Post in New York, one of the first, literally, one of two Star Trek stores in the nation back in the 70s. Worms his way, calls Bob Justman after he's won an Academy Award for doing makeup effects. First movie he ever worked on was The Hunger, working for Dick Smith. Then he won an Academy Award doing makeup on all the villains for Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy. And then he ends up working on Star Trek. What an amazing guy. And then on to Battlestar Galactica, and then season 3 of The Orville. And if you didn't watch those interviews, you should, because he's a really great, uplifting presence that we need in these times. So I am not going to be talking about, well, no, sure I am. I'm lying. I'm going to talk about Star Trek tonight, probably all of Star Trek, but first, we all know that Star Trek Beyond came out in 2016. That was 9 years ago. That was the last time we got a Star Trek movie, co-written by Simon Pegg. And for those of you in the cheap seats, I never liked the Kelvin Star Trek movies. As a matter of fact, there's few things that I hated more than the Kelvin Star Trek movies. And I have said, and I stand by this, I think that Star Trek Into Darkness is probably the most dunder-headed, big-budget Star Trek movie, or science fiction movie ever made, certainly Star Trek movie. And if you look at how much those movies actually cost and how much they returned at the box office, none of those movies made very much money, if at all. I would dare say, were any of them in profitability based on what they cost? Star Trek, the original Star Trek 09, the reported production budget was $175 million. It grossed about $375 million total worldwide. Not a hit. Star Trek Into Darkness cost a hell of a lot more. And it also, I don't think it eked past $500 million. Also not a hit based on cost and marketing. And Star Trek Beyond was anemic. So the 3 Kelvin Star Trek films, which are the last Star Trek movies that we got since the early 2000s with Star Trek Nemesis, and perhaps the less said about that, the better. I don't just dislike the Kelvin Star Trek movies. I wrote an article for Sci-Fi Universe about why, admittedly, this was a snarky article. My friend Dave Hargrove and I wrote an article for Sci-Fi Universe magazine called Worst Contact, Why First Contact is the Worst Star Trek movie. Now, I know you're going to come at me and say, oh, but we love that film. It's the best Next Generation movie. But again, I think it suffered from the same problem that a lot of Star Trek movies suffered from, which is the writing. And I love Ron Moore and Brandon Braga. They were writing Star Trek. Well, they wrote First Contact later, but I thought that was a better movie than Generations was. But they wrote All Good Things, which is one of the great series finales of all time. And Ron Moore went on to do Battlestar Galactica and Outlander and For All Mankind, which For All Mankind really, if I won the lottery or if I had bought that crypto someone tried to get me to buy in 2009, I would have had enough money to pay $5 billion to go buy Star Trek from David Ellison. And I would have said, hey, Paramount and Skydance can release it, but just put me in charge. And I'm going to get the best writers, the smartest writers, the writers that didn't watch just Buffy, but people that read books. Anyway, we'll get into it, but I wanted to start with a trip down memory lane by way of variety. Let's look at what's happened with the Star Trek feature film franchise since the release of Star Trek Beyond in 2016, shall we? And we're going to just use 6 articles that all appeared in Variety to tell you the journey that the Star Trek movie that we have never received was on, beginning in 2018. 2018, April 26th to be exact, in Variety. Star Trek IV. S.J. Clarkson becomes the first female director in franchise history. This was an exclusive written by Justin Kroll. And you're asking yourself right now, really? S.J. Clarkson became the first female director in franchise history? No, she didn't. But let's read this article, shall we? S.J. Clarkson has been tapped to direct Star Trek IV. I'll bet she was tapped, making her the first female to helm a film in the Star Trek franchise. Paramount Pictures had no comment. The studio announced at CinemaCon in Las Vegas that it was planning a 4th movie with Chris Hemsworth, who appeared as Chris Pine's father in 2009 Star Trek. Why not? Why not put Thor? Why not put one of the Avengers in a Star Trek movie, despite the fact that he was killed in the first 10 minutes of Star Trek in 2009? But hey, time travel, whatever. You know, Star Trek is malleable, isn't it? We can make it dunderheaded and stupid. But anyway, Zachary Quinto is also set to return. Paramount is developing another Star Trek film from J.J. Abrams and Quentin Tarantino, but sources say it's still being written and would come after the 4th movie. While details on Star Trek IV are vague, I'm sure they are, because it never happened, sources say a key plot point sees Pine's character running into his father, Hemsworth, in a time travel ploy. Wow, that sounds great. J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay penned the screenplay. And gosh, I'll leave it to you to find out what they went on and created. J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay penned the screenplay. I don't know, but based on the work they did after writing that screenplay, there's probably a good reason why it wasn't made. Abrams and Lindsay Weber will produce through Bad Robot Productions, while David Ellison and Dana Goldberg of Skydance Media will executive produce. And probably Don Granger would be an executive on that film, too. Granger Don, if you remember him from the old AOL Star Trek boards. I do. The original 2009 reboot of Star Trek earned $385 million worldwide, while its sequel, Star Trek Into Darkness, made $467 million globally in 2013. The third, Star Trek Beyond, brought in $343 million worldwide in 2016. And if you add those up, does that get past even $1 billion for 3 movies in a Star Trek franchise? Well, you know what? Let me tell you. Let me finish this. Clarkson is best known for her work on the TV scene, with shows such as Dexter, Bates Motel, Orange is the New Black, and Jessica Jones. She recently directed a handful of episodes for Marvel's The Defenders. And you know what? Why not give a TV director a shot at a feature film and give him Star Trek? I'm sure it's going to work out as great as Stuart Baird worked out directing Star Trek Nemesis, because he came in to recut Tomb Raider 2 and save it for the studio. By the way, Stuart Baird is one of the great editors in Hollywood, and he did direct Executive Decision, which I actually kind of like. But you know what? Star Trek has always been, since the 21st century began, a dumping ground for people to work on the movies. I'm sorry, but it has. And the product that we've received, it shows. But anyway, that's just me opining. Now, think about all this that we just read in this article, revisiting, going down memory lane. This didn't happen. Now, for those of you who usually when they announce that somebody is hired, and I'm not saying this always happens, but Paramount did announce at CinemaCon, that, I'm old school, that they were going to make another Star Trek movie, and they probably should. But here's the thing. Here's the big mistake. Let me tell you about Star Trek. You don't spend $175 million on a Star Trek movie. You don't. In no universe, regardless if it's the Prime universe, the Kelvin universe, you just don't spend that much on a Star Trek film. Star Trek has never, ever justified that kind of expense. There is no way Star Trek can be profitable if you're spending $175 million on a Star Trek movie. Now, people will say, well, Rob, those movies grossed more than any other Star Trek film ever grossed. Well, yeah, that's true compared to its budget. It didn't. If you look at how much, say, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan cost, I think it was $11 million, and it ended up grossing $77 million. That's profitable. You know, as we talk about movies need to earn, let's just call it 3. I like to say 4, but 3 times their budget. Because remember, the studio only takes home half their grosses. And if they're talking about Chinese grosses, they'll be lucky to get a quarter of their grosses. But anyway, I digress. You cannot make a profitable... Now, when I say you cannot, I know you cannot, but I'm sure if there's exceptions, God bless. And I hope you can prove me wrong one day. But as far as Star Trek movies that have been made since 1979, which is when Star Trek the Motion Picture came out, what happens when you're developing a property is money is spent on things that don't get made. Directors might be signed. Now, I don't know how much money is made, but it says that McKay and his compatriot wrote a script. If a script was written and they wrote it for a studio, they have to pay Writers Guild whatever it was negotiated that they would get paid. So money was spent on that script for the Miss Clarkson's film that never got made. How much money? I don't know. Did they pay her? No idea. But money was exchanged, which means that money is now against the budget of the film. And what happens is, the more money you spend developing a movie, suddenly that money needs to be paid back. And one of the reasons that Star Trek the Motion Picture is quoted as having a $44 million budget is you had the development costs of a previous Star Trek movie, Star Trek Planet of the Titans. The Starship Discovery's designs were originally created for Planet of the Titans. That was going to be made in the mid-'70s, and it was rumored that Toshiro Mifune was going to play a Klingon. How badass would that have been? But you had Ken Adam, the great production designer, and Ralph McQuarrie doing illustrations. And the Discovery that later was on Star Trek Discovery, but they fucked up the design. Brian Fuller wouldn't have fucked up the design, but Alex Kurtzman and his cronies fucked that design up and made it, well, stupid. Let's make the primary hull have holes in it. Because why not? Why not have it, I don't know, have less structural integrity in a space-going vessel that's traveling in warp bubbles and things. But I digress. But anyway, so Star Trek the Motion Picture also had all the costs for the Star Trek Phase 2 television series. Sets were built. Miniatures were built. Scripts were written. And for those of you Star Trek fans, you know that 2 of the scripts that were written for the Star Trek Phase 2 television series were made for the next generation, The Child and Devil's Due. And then John Povil, who worked for Gene Roddenberry, ended up directing a new version of his script, The Child, for the Star Trek Phase 2 fan film series that James Cawley was behind. So that's interesting. So they had Planet of the Titans and they had the Phase 2 costs, and they were not insubstantial, that were rolled into the budget of Star Trek the Motion Picture. And then, of course, because it was locked into a release date, Robert Abel and Associates were fired. The effects team, Douglas Trumbull and John Dykstra, were behind the 8 ball, so the costs were enormous, and that's why Star Trek the Motion Picture ended up costing $44 million overall, because they had to absorb the money that was spent on previous iterations of Star Trek that never happened. Well, the same thing would happen to these Star Trek projects that have been tried to be developed since Star Trek Beyond. So the S.D. Clarkson one is number one. Let's go on with our journey through the history of the failed Star Trek movie projects over the last 10 years. Number two. Let's see. Noah Hawley to write and direct next Star Trek movie. Once again, Justin Kroll is reporting on this. This comes to us from Variety on November 19th, 2019. Fargo and Legion creator Noah Hawley has been tapped, I'll bet he was, to write and direct the next installment of the Star Trek franchise, sources tell Variety. Though plot details are being kept under wraps, sources tell Variety the next Star Trek is expected to see Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Carl Urban, and Zoe Saldana returning to man the USS Enterprise. J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot will return to produce, with Hawley also producing through his 26 Keys production banner. This will serve as the fourth movie in the cinematic series and is separate from another Star Trek picture that Paramount is developing with Quentin Tarantino producing and Mark L. Smith writing. More on this later. The studio had tried to launch the fourth film last year, with S.J. Clarkson directing and Chris Pine joining the cast to reprise the role of Pine's father. That film was shelved when deals could not be reached. But the studio is hoping that this attempt will be more successful, with a different plot than the one Hemsworth turned down. Hawley made his feature film directorial debut on Lucy in the Sky, which premiered at the Toronto Film Festival and stars Natalie Portman and John Hamm. He's rep by CAA. Well, you remember Noah Hawley's Star Trek film, right? Oh, wait. You don't, do you? You know why? Didn't happen. Now, I was excited about Noah Hawley's Star Trek movie because I liked Legion and I certainly liked Fargo. Now, we've seen the results of Alien Earth, which are hit and miss. Let's call it that. Unfortunately, the movie didn't get made. It might have something to do with the fact that the feature Lucy in the Sky that he made was not exactly burning up the box office charts. But anyway, and Bad Robot, boy, those people, after Rise of Skywalker, boy, the people at Bad Robot have given us one banger after the other, right? In movie theaters everywhere. J.J. Abrams over the last 6 years has been killing it. And Bad Robot's been killing it with the Star Trek franchise. They know just what to do, right? Oh. Wait. They didn't. They didn't know what to do. But you know who did know what to do? Matt Shakman, the director of WandaVision and, of course, Fantastic Four: First Steps. Let's move on and see what happened with director Matt Shakman, shall we? New Star Trek movie beams up WandaVision director Matt Shakman. And this one comes to us from Adam B. Very. This was in Variety on July 13th, 2001. From the Marvel Cinematic Universe to the Final Frontier, WandaVision director Matt Shakman has been tapped by Paramount Pictures and Bad Robot to direct the next Star Trek feature film from a screenplay by Lindsay Beer. Sierra Burgess is a loser. Well, see, that script screams Star Trek to me, but that means that there was a script and Geneva Robertson, who wrote Captain Marvel. J.J. Abrams is set to produce. The cast, however, remains unclear. Now, remember, that could possibly mean that this would be the third. I don't know if the Chris Hemsworth coming back script was written, but, Noah Hawley, who knows? So potentially now they've paid Writers Guild wages at the studio level for 3 Star Trek scripts. The news comes the same day that Shakman earned an Emmy nomination for helming the inaugural Marvel Studios TV series, one of 23 nods the Disney Plus series earned, including for Best Limited Series. A prolific television director, including 6 Feet Under, House, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Game of Thrones, and Succession, he's directed one previous feature, the 2015 indie thriller Cut Bank, with Liam Hemsworth, the Hemsworth brothers again, and Billy Bob Thornton. It's been a long wait for Paramount to get a new Star Trek feature out of space dock. The last movie, 2016 Star Trek Beyond, was directed by Justin Lin and earned $343.5 million worldwide, the lowest grosses of the 3 Trek reboots, produced by Bad Robots Abrams. These films reset the Trek timeline and recast the original series characters with fresh faces, including Chris Pine as James T. Kirk and Zachary Quinto as Spock. In 2018, S.J. Clarkson, Jessica Jones, signed on to helm another outing with that cast that would also have starred Chris Hemsworth, reprising his brief role as Kirk's father from 2009 Star Trek, which Abrams directed. But Pine and Hemsworth reportedly couldn't come to terms with Paramount, and the film fell apart. Similarly, a much ballyhooed Trek movie backed by Quentin Tarantino appears to be stuck deep in the neutral zone, and Paramount put an original Trek feature from Fargo auteur Noah Hawley on pause last year after Emma Watts took over as president of the Paramount Motion Picture Group. By the way, Emma Watts is dope. I met her once at a screening of X-Men Days of Future Past on the Fox lot. She deserves better, or she did at the time. In March, Paramount and Bad Robot also tapped Fear the Walking Dead writer Kalinda Vasquez to write a Star Trek feature that is separate from the one Shakman is set to direct. So that's a 4th script written by Kalinda Vasquez, written by a fucking TV writer? What is it with all these TV people? Now, I'm not talking about the TV people from Poltergeist. I'm talking about the TV people that are being tapped to write all these Star Trek feature films. You know? I mean, okay. But let's just look at that. And now you're probably asking yourselves, or you're asking me to, what about the Quentin Tarantino Star Trek movie? What about that? Well, I'll tell you. Since that Matt Shakman news was really interesting. Now remember, we're at, that was what, 3 stories? Let's see what this next one is. What's the next story? Oh, wait! From February 15th, 2022. That's right. Star Trek cast, including Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto, returning for a 4th film. This is February 15th, 2022. We just were back in 2021. Now we're in 2022. We've gone from 2018 to 2022. 4 years, 4 stories in Variety about Star Trek movies. They're boldly going back. Paramount is planning to enter negotiations. Not that they're in negotiations. And when we found out, the cast never heard of this one. Paramount is planning to enter negotiations for Star Trek stars Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Zoe Saldana, Carl Urban, and John Cho and Simon Pegg to return to the Enterprise for their 4th tour of duty in the venerable sci-fi franchise. The announcement was made by J.J. Abrams during the Paramount Investors Day presentation on February 15th. So Paramount investors were told, if you're investing in Paramount, J.J. Abrams said, hey, J.J. Abrams, the man who gave you a $2 billion Star Wars movie and then gave you another Star Wars movie that made $1 billion. But okay, so he's talking to the investors. Good for him. So J.J. Abrams told the Paramount investors, if you've invested money in Paramount, there was J.J. Abrams, director of 2 Star Wars movies and 2 Star Trek movies, all of which are something. But he was up there telling investors, hey, we're making another Star Trek movie, Star Trek 4. Hey, investors might have liked to hear that. Maybe people even invested money. We are thrilled to say that we are hard at work on a new Star Trek film that will be shooting by the end of the year, that will be featuring our original cast and some new characters that I think are going to be really fun and exciting to help take Star Trek into areas you've just never seen before, Abrams said. We're thrilled about this film. We have a bunch of other stories that we're talking about that we think will be really exciting, so we can't wait for you to see what we're cooking up. But until then, live long and prosper! The 6 actors first stepped into their respective iconic roles as Kirk, Spock, Uhura, Bones, Sulu, and Scotty in 2009 Star Trek, directed by Abrams, which reset the Star Trek timeline and allowed for the reboot to exist unencumbered from the hundreds of hours of Star Trek continuity that had come before, except it had Spock in it. Our Spock. The actors returned in 2 sequels, 2013 Star Trek Into Darkness, also directed by Abrams, and 2016's Star Trek Beyond, directed by Justin Lin. Abrams is producing the new, as yet untitled film, Through Bad Robot, with Matt Shakman, Matt Shakman still directing, from a screenplay by Josh Friedman and Cameron Squires, based on an earlier draft by Lindsay Beer. That means those new writers were brought in, paid more Writers Guild wages to rewrite the script. Not one writer, but 2 writers. 2 writers, Josh Friedman, who worked on Avatar, and I like Josh Friedman, but these were not cheap guys. Ding, ching, 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 ching. Money's being spent. And everyone's talking about, yeah, Matt Shakman is going to direct this one. Paramount was close to bringing back this cast once before. In 2018's S.J. Clarkson, Jessica Jones had signed up to direct a sequel that would have reunited Kirk Pine with his late father, played by Chris Hemsworth, reprising his performance from the 2009 Star Trek. That film never materialized. However, materialized after Paramount reportedly couldn't close a deal with Pine and Hemsworth. Since then, insiders say the studio has done market research to determine audience interest in the rebooted cast, given the long wait period between Beyond, which lost money for Paramount, and a prospective new Trek film. Execs determined that there was still lasting audience enthusiasm for Pine, Quinto, and the rest of the cast in their established roles, which allowed the studio to feel comfortable with moving forward with bringing them back. What audience? What audience had enthusiasm for this? Paramount has also explored several other avenues for Trek features, none of which seem to have ultimately borne fruit. Quentin Tarantino reportedly cooled on a Star Trek script he was pursuing with the Revenant screenwriter Mark L. Smith. Remember, Quentin Tarantino had an idea. He was not writing the script. And he loved Star Trek, and I know that because he came and saw my film, Free Enterprise, at the Hawaii International Film Festival and cornered me for an hour. And he knew every line of Shatner's dialogue after seeing the movie once, and he was very enthusiastic, and it meant a lot to me. That was the only one of 2 times I met Quentin Tarantino in real life, and I'm a big fan. Can't wait to see Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair, one more time without the French subtitles. Anyway, but when Emma Watts became president of the Paramount Motion Picture Group a few months later, insiders said she paused all Star Trek development, including Hawley's film, to decide how best to move forward with one of the studio's crown jewel franchises, with Watts' departure from Paramount in September. It's unclear what the current Trek film portends for other development for the franchise, including a screenplay by Fear the Walking Dead co-executive producer Kalinda Vasquez. Bringing the 2009 Star Trek cast back could prove a challenge, given that they've all had busy schedules since Beyond. Pine added the Wonder Woman franchise to his resume, and he'll next appear in Olivia Wilde's thriller Don't Worry Darling and the Black Ops film Violence of Action. Quinto headlined the AMC series Nos for A2 and starred in the Broadway revival of The Boys in the Band and its 2020 Netflix film adaptation. Saldana continued to roll as Gamora in several Marvel Studios films, including Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and Avengers Endgame. She'll star in Avatar 2 this year and in Guardians Volume 3 in 2023. Urban appeared in 2017's Thor Ragnarok, and he'll continue his performance as Billy Butcher on Season 3 of Amazon's The Boys in June. Cho co-starred in the acclaimed indies Columbus and Searching, and he starred in Netflix's live-action adaptation of the anime series Cowboy Bebop, and Peg starred with Nick Frost on Amazon's horror comedy series Truth Seekers, and he'll reprise his role as Benji in Mission Impossible 7 in 2023. One member of the 2009 Trek cast, however, sadly cannot join them. Anton Yelchin, who played Chekhov, died in an accident in June of 2016, a month before Beyond opened in theaters. So, now, we're going to take a detour. We're going to take an interesting detour. Now, this is also, that article was from February 15th, 2022. Here's another article from February 17th, 2022. What happened to Tarantino's Star Trek film? Every detail about his canceled pitch. This comes from Zach Sharf. Paramount confirmed this week that WandaVision director Matt Shakman will head into production on a new Star Trek movie later this year with Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Zoe Saldana, Carl Urban, John Cho, and Simon Pegg reprising their roles for a fourth go-round on the big screen. But he didn't, did he? You don't remember that fourth movie because it never got made. And yet, hey, money is being spent. Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. How many scripts now do we have? 5, 6, 7, maybe? For Quentin Tarantino fans, hang on, let me jump back into this article. For Quentin Tarantino fans, the news is the latest reminder that Oscar winner's Star Trek movie remains dead, at least for now. Tarantino fans were sent into a frenzy in late 2017 after it was announced that Paramount and Star Trek producer J.J. Abrams loved Tarantino's pitch for a new Star Trek movie and were assembling a writer's room to flesh out the idea. Tarantino ultimately partnered with the Revenant screenwriter Mark L. Smith, who was tasked with writing a Star Trek film script based on Tarantino's idea, while Tarantino was busy finishing post-production and touring the world for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Smith revealed on the Bulletproof Screenwriting podcast in August of 2021 that J.J. Abrams' production company Bad Robot gave him a call on Tarantino's behalf. They just called me and said, "Hey, are you up for it? Do you want to go? Quentin wants to hook up." And I said, "Yeah," the screenwriter said. And that was the first day I met Quentin in the room. And he's reading a scene that he wrote. And it was this awesome, cool gangster scene. Perhaps picking up on the second season original series episode A Piece of the Action, setting it on Sigma Iota, which, by the way, is a grand idea. And it would have made, I think, a fantastic movie. To see what happens when the Sigma Iotans, a very imitative people, wanted a piece of the Federation's action. Could be great. They've revisited that in books and comics, and Quentin Tarantino doing that, that could have been a match made in heaven. So he wrote, and it was this awesome, cool gangster scene, and he's acting it out and back and forth. I told him I was so mad I didn't record it on my phone. It would be so valuable. It was amazing. Tarantino intended to bring a pulp fiction vibe to Star Trek, with an idea that was largely an earthbound story set in a 1930s gangster setting. Which means, I mean, you could say, was he talking about Cyrus Redblock from the first season episode, The Big Goodbye of Next Generation? I doubt it. As a matter of fact, I'd bet money on it. Tarantino's pitch appeared to take inspiration from A Piece of the Action, the 17th episode of the second season of Star Trek, the original series. The installment, which aired in 1968, followed the Enterprise crew as they visit a planet with an Earth-like 1920s gangster culture. Now, for those of you who say that Star Trek is silly, one of the interesting things about that episode was, while it was one of the more overtly comedic Star Trek episodes, it was also about the Prime Directive and the dangers of what happens when Earth contaminates a culture. The Sigma Iotans were a very, as we said, imitative people, and the Horizon that visited the planet first left behind a book, Chicago Mobs of the 20s. And the Sigma Iotans, not really understanding what that meant in terms of Earth society, decided to recreate their entire civilization in the image of the Chicago Mobs of the 20s, which meant, by the way, plug, you can listen to True Noir, the audio drama that I directed that was written by Max Allan Collins, writer of Road to Perdition, and many other books. He's a Mystery Writers of America Grandmaster, but it took place during the same time. But that would have been a pretty interesting movie. But the whole point of that episode, while comedic, it was dealing with pretty heavy issues of the Prime Directive, the non-interference directive, and that was really cool. So even though it was a comedic Star Trek episode, it actually had a lot of meat behind it. It had something interesting to say about the Star Trek universe. Unlike modern Star Trek, that has nothing interesting to say about the Star Trek universe. It really doesn't have much interesting to say about really anything. But that's not what this episode's about tonight. Smith told the Bulletproof Screenwriting that the screenwriting process started almost immediately after he agreed to work with Tarantino, adding, "I would go hang out at his house one night and we would watch old gangster films. And we were there for hours. We were just kicking back, watching gangster films, laughing at the bad dialogue, but talking about how it would bleed into what we wanted to do." According to Smith, Tarantino's Star Trek idea was really wild and like its own very cool episode. The plot included a little time travel stuff going on. It had a lot of fun with Chris Pine's Captain Kirk. Tarantino fans expected the director to go all in on Pine, considering Tarantino's outspoken love for the actor. Tarantino has called the Pine-starring Unstoppable one of his favorite action films, and he had nothing but raves for Pine's performance as Kirk in the 2009 Star Trek reboot. "I thought Chris Pine did a fantastic job, not just playing Captain Kirk, but playing William Shatner's captain. He is William Shatner," Tarantino once told MTV. "He's not just another guy, he's William Shatner's Captain Kirk. And Zachary Quinto is literally Leonard Nimoy's because they both have the same scene together. It's his Spock. They fucking nail it. They just nail it." Tarantino's Star Trek was widely believed to be rated R, although it was never confirmed. Well, it couldn't be rated R because they never made the movie. Movies have to be made before you can rate them. Fans expected the R rating given the graphic nature of Tarantino's movies. It was also never confirmed that Tarantino would direct the script himself. Tarantino has maintained that he is retiring from feature filmmaking after his 10th directorial effort, which means he only has one movie left to make, post Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Fans question whether or not Tarantino would want an IP-based movie like Star Trek to be his current call. Tarantino revealed to Consequence of Sound in December of 2019 that he was steering away from directing the Trek movie. A final blow arrived in January 2020 when Tarantino confirmed, "I think they might make that movie, but I just don't think I'm going to direct it. It's a good idea. They should definitely do it, and I'll be happy to come in and give them some notes on the first rough cut." After Justin Lin's 2016 entry Star Trek Beyond underwhelmed at the box office with less than $400 million worldwide, Paramount put a pause on the film franchise as it figured out what to do next. Well, they didn't really put a pause on the film franchise because they spent a fuck ton of money hiring and firing directors and writing scripts that never got made. Just wanted to point that out. Tarantino and Smith's script was one of 3 potential Star Trek films in development at the same time. Fargo and Legion creator Noah Hawley was working on his own Star Trek film that was to feature a new cast, while Paramount was also developing a more traditional sequel to Beyond with the same cast. Filmmaker S.J. Clarkson was attached to his third Trek idea for a time. Filmmaker S.J. Clarkson was attached to this third Trek idea for a time. The Star Trek announcement this week confirmed that a Beyond sequel with a returning cast is officially a go. Paramount announced in July of 2021 that Shakman was hired to helm a new Star Trek movie, the cast for which was unclear at the time. Shakman is a prolific television director with credits that include WandaVision, 6 Feet Under, House, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Game of Thrones, and Succession. He's only directed one previous feature, the 2015 indie Cut Bank, with Liam Hemsworth and Billy Bob Thornton. As reported by Variety, Paramount did market research to determine whether or not there was still audience interest in Chris Pine and the 2009 reboot cast, given the long wait between Beyond and the new Trek film. Insiders said that the studio executives determined that there was still lasting audience enthusiasm for Pine, Quinto, and the rest of the cast, which allowed the studio to feel comfortable with moving forward with bringing them back. Now, I love this. Insiders said that studio executives determined. These, I would imagine, are the same studio executives that have been trying to greenlight, hire, fire, figure out what script they're going to use since Star Trek Beyond came out in 2016. Those same executives, oh yes, there's lots of interest. Sure, Jan. 67. One person most likely relieved that Paramount is moving ahead on a Star Trek movie without Tarantino is Rod Rodenberry, son of Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry and the CEO of Rodenberry Entertainment. Roddenberry, who serves as an executive producer on several Star Trek series on Paramount Plus, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Lower Decks told Forbes in September of 2021 that he had mixed feelings on Tarantino coming into the Star Trek fold. I struggle with that because the way I'm pretty myopic with the way I see Star Trek, Rodenberry said when asked about Tarantino's Star Trek idea. I mentioned that I grew up with fans coming up to me and saying how Star Trek inspired them and gave them hope for the future. Well, that was a long time ago. It's the optimism and the messaging in there that makes Star Trek what it was. Certainly, the keyword there is was. I truly believe that. If you create a Star Trek that is just action, that is not Star Trek, which they did in 2009. In my opinion, that's what makes it different than Star Wars, and I love Star Wars. But they can both coexist. And I love Tarantino's work and the kind of films that he does. I'm trying to have an open mind. Rodenberry continued, I would be curious to read a script on his take. I do not think you could say, we're going to do Reservoir Dogs Star Trek. I'll be honest, that doesn't work for me. But he is a fan, and I think as a fan, he probably understands to some degree that Star Trek has to have some of this messaging. Production on the now Tarantino-less new Star Trek movie will begin later this year. Okay. Sure. Whatever you say. Now, since then, in the intervening years, and I don't have a Variety article about this, so I apologize, they have developed a new Star Trek movie. And that Star Trek movie was, go figure, about the birth of the Federation, and it dealt with the Romulan War, the first Romulan War. And I'm not saying that I've ever read any of that script or know anything about it, but it wasn't good. I'm just going to say it wasn't good. And it's interesting that they decided to go that way because, as I've said many times on this show, back in 2005, after Enterprise went off the air, for a while, Donald DeLine and Carey McCluggage were basically running Paramount. And they tapped Eric Jedrinson, who was the supervising producer of Band of Brothers, to give his take on a Star Trek movie. Now, what I found interesting, and by the way, Eric Jedrinson also wrote the last two Mission Impossible movies with Chris McQuarrie, so he was writing for Paramount. What I found interesting about his take, and you can find his take online, I'm not advocating you go find scripts that were never made, but there was a script called Star Trek: The Beginning that Eric Jedrinson wrote. And it is about the very same thing. And interestingly enough, it's about a graduating class at Starfleet Academy, and it's about the outbreak of the Romulan War. I thought that script really captured the essence of Star Trek. It delves into the Starfleet Academy idea. It's a follow-up to Enterprise in canonical time. Takes place, 8 years after the end of Enterprise. You could bring Captain Archer back. You could position him like Mike Sussman's story that he's been talking about making Archer president of the Federation. But Eric Jedrinson only wrote one draft of Star Trek: The Beginning, and then what happened was Donald DeLine and Carey McCluggage were then ousted. That script died on the vine, and what he had described it as is he wanted it to be the Iliad, the Odyssey, and a third movie. He saw it as a triptych, a trilogy of movies about these brand new characters. Now, I'm not saying that script was perfect, but as a first draft, it was right there in the Star Trek wheelhouse, and I really enjoyed the way they went with it. It had a lot of really interesting ideas about the Romulans wanting to ethnically cleanse Vulcans from Earth. And it was really topical. It was full of adventure. It was full of excitement. And it had a great opening scene that I wish that they had made when they were having to graduate from Starfleet Academy. By the way, in the opening pages of Jedrinson's script, I guarantee you it was better than anything we're going to get in the upcoming Starfleet Academy TV series. But they were having a regatta, a sailing regatta, with these hover catamarans in San Francisco Bay, with these boats racing underneath the Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, and all the admirals and the Vulcans and everybody were watching, and you're meeting the characters racing against each other on these boats. It was dope, and it was very Star Trek. The thing was, the interesting thing about Eric Jedrinson is he will tell you, like Nicholas Meyer before him, he'd never watched Star Trek. Never watched it. And what he did was, like Nicholas Meyer, he jumped right in. Now, Jedrinson's a very highly educated guy, along with Nicholas Meyer. He worked on a show called Band of Brothers, which is a show about camaraderie, about the military, about World War II, where, I mean, if you want people to work on Star Trek shows, you want highly educated, cultured people that know literature, that know art, that know music, that have made things like Band of Brothers, which in a way is very Star Trek. You have an ensemble group trying to, survive World War II. Nicholas Meyer did the same thing. He delved into Star Trek history. He understood that Rodenberry told him Horatio Hornblower, it's all in those books. Eric Jedrinson did the same thing. He did a deep dive into Star Trek, especially Enterprise, and Jedrinson said, look, one of the important things about Star Trek, we interviewed him on the Inglorious Treksperts podcast. I spoke to him, that's why I know this. He said, one of the great strengths of Star Trek is you have a universe. You already have history that exists. And rather than be constrained, the thing is, if you're trying to work within Star Trek canon and deal with everything that's come before, that can be a little constraining. And the idea of going back to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy again, prequels, the Kelvin universe is basically, let's tell the story of Kirk and Spock meeting. Well, Shatner and the Reeve Stevens did that in a great book called Collision Course, and it was way better than Star Trek 09. And because of the Kelvinverse, they had to stop writing their books, which fucking sucked. I'm not bitter. But I'm just saying, the idea of going back and trying to reinvent Kirk, Spock, and McCoy for a new generation and change everything is a bummer. Because the Star Trek universe has history. Its history is actually creatively interesting because you've got so much of the world already built for you, so you can concentrate instead on the new characters you want to create and new stories. The Star Trek-ness of it will take care of itself. So what ended up happening in Jedrinson's draft is he's like, I want to be canonically accurate. So he did a story 8 years after Enterprise. We'd heard about the Romulan War as far back as the original series, the first season, the first half of the first season, the 66-67 season in Balance of Terror. And by the way, you want to watch an episode that tells you exactly how to make a Star Trek episode? Watch Balance of Terror and watch the really shitty rip-off homage they did for Strange New Worlds. And you're like, these people know how to write, and these people don't, because one, they're ripping off an episode badly, they destroy the Romulans, and none of this gobbledygook makes any sense. But your mileage may vary. But anyway, so the Jedrinson script of Star Trek The Beginning is imperfect because he wrote a first draft. But as a first draft, you see where it would have gone. You see how it could have been the basis of a really great Star Trek movie that didn't have to cost $200 million. What you do, even today, if you want to bring Star Trek back as a viable franchise, you cap the spending at $100 million, maybe $125. You know what you do? You take a page out of 20th Century Fox president Steve Asbell's book. When he made Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, you know what he did? He cut the budget by $30 million from War for the Planet of the Apes. He made Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes for $30 million less. He made Alien Romulus for less than $100 million. Why? Because Steve Asbell's the quiet king of franchises, and he knows how to handle IP. He brought back Hellraiser. Hell, man, you can watch The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. As a matter of fact, Steve Asbell loves Star Trek. I think that somebody should work out a deal and just have Steve consult, or just, hey, David Ellison, you can do whatever the hell you want. Why not borrow Steve Asbell and have him, hell, he'll stay in his office at Fox. Have him develop the new Star Trek movie. Give it to Steve Asbell. He's a studio president, and I guarantee you, Steve Asbell could do in 3 months what Paramount hasn't been able to do in Star Trek for 9 years. And you're not going to have like 87,000 scripts and 20,000 people hired and fired and let go, and how much money was spent? Shit, man. They should just give Star Trek to 20th Century Fox. Figure that out. Because Steve Asbell would get it done for you. Just saying. Predator Badlands. He made 3 Predator movies. All respectable. He revised the Hellraiser franchise on TV. Also, he made the first fucking Omen, which is a way better movie than it gets credit for. Go back and watch the first Omen. That movie's kind of a banger. Did not cost a lot of money. The incompetence, the visionless, rudderless, lacking dilithium vision at Paramount, of which there is no vision at Paramount, because nobody who's attached to these projects loves Star Trek. It was all work for hire. Look, anyone who gets a job, I love Star Trek, it's great. Yeah, then you wind up getting whatever we've been getting since 2017 on TV. You take Brian Fuller's really interesting ideas and let's get rid of those ideas. Let's combine it with Dune and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and the mycellular network that was designed to be for terraforming, which made sense, is now going to be the way we travel through space. Let's do that. Hey, let's not do that. And then they did it. And then every year they realized, we have to reinvent our premise. None of this is working. Let's jump 1,000 years into the future. Gosh, you know what? If you guys take the time and you look up a Star Trek pitch document called Star Trek Federation, and you look at the date of that pitch document, and you think to yourself, here's a pitch document that's available online about jumping ahead 1,000 years into the future. And then they did that on Star Trek Discovery. Hell, they ripped off David Mack's book Section 31, a Section 31 novel he wrote for the second season. He didn't even get credit. But I digress. Let's get back to Eric Jedrinson's script. Good stuff there. Jedrinson knew what was up. He was a great creator for Star Trek. And that script actually exists. It's funny because then they developed the same kind of script, which, not good. Not good. Same thing that Jedrinson was going to do. And it probably will never happen because nobody wants to take the scraps that were already done and bring them forward. Nobody wants to do that. Ask anybody at Warner Brothers, how's that Logan's Run remake going? Huh? How many people came and went on that? Huh? Anyway, we're not done. So anyway, there was no Variety article about this Star Trek, the Marines, Macaws, the Romulan War, Ground Pounders, whatever that fucking thing is. I don't even know. I'm glad they didn't make it. And whose brilliant idea was that? Well, it was Eric Jedrinson's. He did it first. But anyway, there's one more article that came out last week. And you're all familiar with it, aren't you? You know. Here it is. Let's jump ahead to 2025. We were in 2022 talking about Tarantino. Let's go to 2025. Shall we? Why not? New Star Trek movie in the works from Dungeons & Dragons duo Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly. John Francis Daly, you might remember, is a cast member of Freaks and Geeks. Anyway, or was that Jonathan Goldstein? I'm just kidding. I know. I'm sorry. I kid. Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly, the duo behind Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves and the screenplay for Spider-Man Homecoming, that's promising, are enlisting in Starfleet. They've been hired to write, produce, and direct a new Star Trek film that will seek to revitalize the franchise after it has languished for nearly a decade without a big screen adventure. It's languished? It's languished. Yeah, they haven't tried to do anything with it in the last decade, right, Variety? However, as Variety previously reported, the new film will not be a continuation of the J.J. Abrams-led reboot of the series and won't feature Chris Pine or any of the actors from those movies. Pine starred in Goldstein and Daly's D&D film. It's so funny, they get directors who work with Chris Pine in what I think is a wonderful movie. I'll flat out say it. Is Dungeons & Dragons going to change your life? No. But like Predator Badlands, it felt like a movie that would have been right at home in the mid-'80s, around the circa Back to the Future. It was a really fun romp. I really liked the Dungeons & Dragons movie, but it didn't make any money. In fact, while plot details are being kept under wraps, this project is not connected to any previous a previous or current TV series, movie, or prior movie development projects. So you're out of luck, Jean-Luc Picard and Catherine Janeway. Ho, ho, ho. Since Star Trek Beyond opened in 2016, the road to mounting a new film in the franchise has been bumpier than a Klingon's forehead. Chris Hemsworth almost returned as the seemingly deceased father of Captain Kirk from 2009 Star Trek. Quentin Tarantino almost directed a Star Trek movie set in the world of 1930s gangsters. None of this was almost. You know, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Noah Hawley and Matt Shakman each got so close to directing a Star Trek movie that sets were being built. Okay, this is new information, which means how much money was spent? If sets were being built, that means your entire art department was hired, apparently twice. Your entire production design was done because they were building sets. How many millions of dollars was that? Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. This, my friends, is not how you run a studio. It's not how you run franchises. And it's certainly not how you should run Hollywood. This is massive, massive, massive incompetence on a grand scale. But neither project came to fruition. So this is the first time close to directing a Star Trek movie that sets were being built. Holy shit. I mean, think about that. My first job was in the art department on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. It is not cheap. You're not just talking about one person. You have an entire construction crew, your production designers, your art directors, they've all been hired. That's a big fucking deal. Anyway, also, unions. Anyway, the sets were being built, but neither project came to fruition, and both filmmakers moved on to other franchises, Hawley with FX's Alien Earth, and Shakman with Marvel's The Fantastic Four First Steps. By the way, The Fantastic Four First Steps, after seeing that and watching it again on Disney+, it's too bad we didn't get a Star Trek movie from Matt Shakman, because his sensibilities, I think, could have created a pretty great one. In 2024, Variety reported that Steve Yockey, the flight attendant, was writing a draft for the final Chapter Trek movie. Okay, this is another script that was Steve Yockey, another script, was writing a draft for the final Chapter Trek movie starring the cast led by Pine, Zachary Quinto, and Zoe Saldana. And Toby Haynes, Andor, had been tapped to direct a Star Trek origin story. Okay, this was the Toby Haynes was going to direct. Now, Toby Haynes also directed the USS Callister episodes on Black Mirror that were riffs on TNG. And the second one, they're both good, but the second one was legitimately a banger. So I would, if you haven't watched the USS Callister episodes of Black Mirror, take a gander. And that second one was terrific. And the origin story was written by Seth Grahame-Smith, the Abraham Lincoln vampire hunter. That was the script. That was the Marines and a Romulan war script. Yeah, because I want the writer of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter to write a Star Trek script. But you know what? As evidenced by what I read, I don't. Anyway, but now both productions appear to be stranded in deep space with life support failing. Getting a new Star Trek out of dry dock has been a priority for Paramount since David Ellison's Skydance took control of the company in August, because the series is one of the most endearing properties in the studio's library. Also, they need to show a return because their balance sheet on Star Trek movies, you got to be deep into that. Millions and millions of dollars of money blown and no movie made. I would estimate, with the amount of scripts that were written, and if they were really building two sets for different movies, you might be looking at deep into the five figures. Pardon me, in five figures. What am I talking about? Five figures, six figures in terms of money. I mean, you might be in excess of $10 million, probably more, invested in Star Trek movies that never got made. That is unconscionable. But anyway. Daly and Jonathan Goldstein are known to Ellison and Company, having recently written, directed, and produced the Skydance film Mayday, starring Ryan Reynolds and Kenneth Branagh, which they produced through their Gold Day banner, and it will premiere on Apple TV. I don't know much about that, but I hope it's good. Daly and Goldstein previously helmed New Line's comedy Game Night and wrote and directed the studio's Vacation reboot. The duo's additional writing credits include Horrible Bosses and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. Goldstein and Daly are represented by CAA, Fourth Wall Management, and Hansen. Jacobs, Teller, Hoberman, Newman, Warren, Richmond, Rush, Keller, Gelman, Meigs, and Fox. I guess that's our law firm. So, there we are. We have yet 9 years, and as many scripts have been written, and sets were built, and people were hired and let go, and you know what's interesting? There's over 1,000 Star Trek novels, and there's probably the same amount of comic books. IDW are the current stewards of the Star Trek franchise in comic book form. They put out some good stuff. They put out some not so good stuff. But for the most part, they've been pretty good custodians of the franchise. There are many Star Trek novels and novelists. Kirsten Beyer obviously worked on Discovery. She's worked on Strange New Worlds. And she wrote all the Voyager novels. David Mack, one of my favorite Star Trek novelists, wrote, I mean, if you want to read great Star Trek, he wrote what he calls the Odyssey trilogy. It's a banger. And he was one of the great architects of Star Trek Vanguard, which was a great series set in the original. It was set in the time of the original series. That should have been it wasn't a prequel series. It was an adjunct to the original series. But it's definitely its own thing, its own character. Sometimes it crossed over, but really great stuff. Peter David wrote his New Frontiers series, which was, I liked it, hit and miss. The point is, there's amazing ideas contained in the best of the Star Trek novels. A lot of them, not so much. But you could probably make a list of 50 of those books. The same way, if you went back and you looked at Dark Horse Star Wars comics or Dark Horse Predator comics, I mean, why they didn't go back, and I would suspect Steve Asbell, the Quiet King of Franchises, knows very well that the Dark Horse Predator versus Aliens miniseries, the first one, is ripe for mining for a Predator versus Aliens movie. Of course, by adapting a comic book, a writer doesn't get the prestige of saying they wrote it, so I understand. Point is, there are so many great stories that already exist in the ether. Why is it that these IPs, that Star Wars, I mean, Strange New Worlds has been ripping off Star Trek novels. They ripped off Dorothy Fontana's backstory for Una from Vulcan's Glory, the one Star Trek novel that she wrote. They rip off Ursula K. Le Guin. So, the people that are currently making Star Trek on TV are they steal old Star Trek stories. They're very good at thievery. Unfortunately, they're not good thieves. It's too bad. Because they got all the money, they got a great cast, but their writing, it's like none of them have read a science fiction novel. I mean, I would imagine, hell, I did an experiment on this show. I got a great Star Trek story by giving it prompts to Chat GPT. But anyway, there's a lot of material that goes unread or unlooked at because nobody knows. Nobody is a Star Trek fan. I mean, if you look at the interviews I did with Doug Drexler, the last two shows, look at what somebody who is passionate about the Star Trek franchise can do. And while I get a lot of, I don't know why people dislike this, I loved what Terry Matalas did for Picard Season 3. I especially love what he did with our legacy characters. Look, he was saddled with the gobbledygook that was Picard Seasons 1 and 2, and which truly was gobbledygook. And so is Strange New Worlds, and so is Discovery. It's all gobbledygook. None of it is very good. Here's a test. Name one Star Trek episode, or name... I bet the only episodes or things you can really name are from Lower Decks. but anyway, and that doesn't count because it's farcical parody, whatever. But Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Star Trek Discovery, what stands out? Anything? Bueller? I mean, they're just... It's not... literally, Star Trek Strange New Worlds is based on... it's really based on the portrayal of Pike that Anson Mount beautifully does. Anson Mount deserves so much better. The entire cast of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is very, very capable. I never thought I would love Christina Chong's character. I hate the fact that, why did they tie her to Khan Noonien Singh? It's the dumbest shit ever. I mean, it's so stupid. She could have been her own thing, her own character. She's a great actress. She's great in that role. And they saddle her with a dumb backstory. By the way, ruining Khan, ruining Space Seed. I mean, that show just keeps ruining the original series. They just keep doing. And then Memory Alpha Online just has to just figure out a way to slam all this gobbledygook into their great Star Trek reference site that is now so contaminated with bullshit you can't even read it anymore. It makes no sense, but that's just me. So now we have two guys that have they specialize in doing lighthearted comedic ensemble work. Now, let me tell you what I think is why is it so hard to make a Star Trek movie? What is the real problem? And I'll tell you what the problem is. And I'm right about this. The people in power do not know what Star Trek actually is. They don't know. They don't know the formula. They don't know what made it work. And part of the problem is that, I've said this a million times before, you have to go back to first principles. Look, it's funny to me, nobody comes in and wants to reinvent Star Wars. They keep things the same, other than, J.J. Abrams wants to give the Millennium Falcon a rectangular dish because he wants to get money from merchandise sales. I respect that. Why does C-3PO have a red arm? I don't know. So J.J. Abrams can make money when they can look at that. This C-3PO action figure has a red arm. That money goes to Bad Robot. Yeah, how'd you do with that Gorn video game, people? And what about all the merchandise that came from the Kelvin Universe movies? You still can't even buy the Revell model kit of that Enterprise domestically. Wow. Anyway, I digress. So why does Star Trek movies, why haven't they been able to work? No one who's been hired to make these movies, one, is passionate about Star Trek, first of all, or two, knows Star Trek, knows what it is. They're always trying to make it into something else, and Paramount wants to make it into something else because they look around and they're like, wow, we thought Star Trek would be $1 billion franchise, like Transformers. Shouldn't it have been? I mean, Transformers is based on a toy line from the 80s. Star Trek is this beloved, venerable franchise that's been around since 1966. I mean, remember, in 1994, Star Trek The Next Generation ended. Star Trek Generations came out. Star Trek Deep Space Nine was on the air, and they announced the Paramount Network was going to launch with a new Star Trek series, Star Trek Voyager, and Jean-Luc Picard and James T. Kirk were on the cover of Time fucking magazine. In 94, 31 years ago, Star Trek was at its zenith. Why? Because everybody who was making Star Trek knew what they were doing. They understood. Rick Berman was cooking with gas with one of the great TV production teams that's ever worked in history. 25 seasons of Star Trek over 18 years. And you know what? He came in on time and on budget every single season. Now, you might have problems with the way Rick Berman told stories, but I'll tell you, when Michael Piller came on in the third season of Next Generation and they started focusing on the characters, that third season ended with the best of both worlds, and suddenly Star Trek was thrust into the limelight. A syndicated science fiction show that was a revival of Star Trek was now being talked about in all of the major magazines, all of major entertainment trades. What was going to happen at the end of Best of Both Worlds? Would Patrick Stewart come back? The world had become Star Trek fans. Star Trek Season 7, Next Generation, went out on a huge note, huge numbers for a syndicated show. Star Trek changed television forever in the Berman era. 25 seasons, 26 episodes a season for 18 years, and 4 feature films, which didn't fare as well. But still, they made all of those. Doug Drexler was part of one of the great art departments of all time. And what did it give you? Consistency. Mike and Denise Okuda, arguably the crown prince and princess of Star Trek. Mike Okuda came. He was a huge Star Trek fan. He got tapped by Ralph Winter to come work on Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home and never left. Never left. His wife, Denise, was on the wreck deck of the Starship Enterprise as it launched to take on V'ger in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I mean, Herman Zimmerman, production design. John Dwyer, who worked on the original series came on and worked in the art department for Next Generation. I mean, the people that were making Star Trek were passionate. Ron Moore got his start as a writer there. Ron Moore, who went from Next Generation in the 3rd season, went to Deep Space Nine. I don't know how much on Voyager he did, but he co-created a show, Battlestar Galactica, the revival of a show that was never very good in the first place, and gave us one of the most banger science fiction shows ever made. Arguably, when you talk about the great science fiction, right up there. And he's also a co-creator of my favorite Star Trek prequel, unofficial of course, For All Mankind. By the way, Apple, where's the 5th season? Where is it? If you look at science fiction on television, if you look at shows like Severance, like the 3rd season of Foundation, like fucking Pluribus, okay, I ask all of you people, have you seen a show that has engendered more YouTube videos about what the fuck is going on after 3 episodes than Pluribus has? I mean, my God, we are getting Trek-like shows in For All Mankind. You watch For All Mankind, and yes, is it a soap opera? Certainly, because it's about people on the ground. But you watch episodes, that last episode of the 2nd season, For All Mankind runs rings around modern Star Trek. It is embarrassing comparing the two of those shows. You've got people that are writing with real science. They understand how you can turn spaceships decelerating into like high tension to the point where you're covering your eyes. God, I wish Star Trek knew how to do that. But anyway, back to why doesn't a Star Trek movie work? Well, first of all, go with me on this. You guys all love Galaxy Quest, right? In Galaxy Quest, the movie, we meet these actors that obviously inspired by Star Trek, conventions, all that. But in Galaxy Quest, you get to see snippets of the Galaxy Quest TV show. By Grapthos Hammer! Never give up, never surrender, catchphrases. The problem with Star Trek is all the people that have been making it in the modern age think it's the kind of show that Galaxy Quest was as depicted in the movie Galaxy Quest. That show is portrayed as silly. It's goofy. It's not something to be taken seriously. And I love Galaxy Quest, but I think that's a fatal flaw. Because what you're doing is, look, it's an affectionate look at the whole Star Trek phenomenon. And it's actually a legitimately great science fiction movie in its own right. But what it has to say about the actual Star Trek show in the guise of Galaxy Quest is not flattering. It doesn't show, and it is, to be fair, it is a comedy. And, you have to saddle Alan Rickman with the prosthesis and all of that. But Star Trek wasn't silly. And yet the perception of it is. So the people that come on to create Star Trek, it's very difficult if they're told to go back and watch the original series. They'll go to Trouble with Tribbles, they'll go to Arena, they'll go to A Private Little War and see the Mugatu. The Mugatu, which of course was used in Zoolander. Star Trek, the pop culture sense memory of Star Trek is it's goofy. Star Trek was not a goofy show. You had some of the great fantasists in the mid-20th century, some of the great fantasy writers, the great short story writers, the great novelists, actual science fiction writers who were writing scripts for television, Twilight Zone, things like that. Richard Matheson writing for Twilight Zone and Star Trek, and movies like Legend of Hell House. I Am Legend, his novel, was adapted 3 times. That Richard Matheson. Yeah, Will Smith, I Am Legend, Last Man on Earth, The Omega Man. All 3 of those movies were based on the same book, I Am Legend. If you haven't read it, read it. It's a great fucking horror novel. That guy wrote for Star Trek. That guy wrote for the original series, the original Twilight Zone. These were the kind of people that were writing for Star Trek. They were our greatest fantasists. They were true writers that worked in all different mediums. They were educated men and women in Dorothy Fontana. And so that's what is missing from modern Star Trek. No one takes it seriously. It's all a fucking goof. And that's the problem with Star Trek. Everyone is looking in the wrong direction. You know what? If you want to look at Star Trek, if you want to write Star Trek, look at Pluribus. Look at the third season of Foundation. Look at For All Mankind. Look at the German television series Dark. Look at the great science fiction and fantasy that's on television right now, that's in the theaters. Look at fucking Denis Villeneuve's Dune. And don't rip it off for the Mycellular Network and fucking Discovery. Really look at it. Better yet, read the goddamn books. Star Trek is missing intelligence. Star Trek is missing thoughtfulness. Star Trek is missing people that have something to say, that didn't grow up and just watch fucking Buffy and Angel. Let's do a puppet episode. Fuck you. No, let's not do that. Let's not do that. Let's not rip off everybody else's work. Let's come up with something on our own. I love Once More with Feeling too. Where do we go from here? Certainly not modern Star Trek. They can't make a movie. And what we are getting on TV is fucking terrible. And I know people like it. I do. But it's not good. It's not going to stand the test of time. History will judge. And I sit here and I watch this stuff. I am surrounded by shelves of Star Trek books, shelves of things I have covered as a documentarian. I've spent years of my life talking to people who really were passionate and cared about what they made. I would suggest that all of you, if I do say so myself, watch the Blu-ray documentaries Roger Lay Jr. and I slaved over that appear on the Next Generation Blu-rays. We did 15 discs of Star Trek documentaries. Hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of commentaries, of documentaries, of interviews, of roundtable discussions. Seth MacFarlane hosts a roundtable discussion on the season 3 disc with Naren Shankar, with Renee Echevarria, with Brandon Braga and Ron Moore. We were the first people to do Inside the Writer's Room, but it was only for DVD. Watch a conversation I host with the cast of The Next Generation on season 2. You know, I spent a long time of my professional career delving into what makes Star Trek great, and I see none of it. I've seen none of it. J.J. Abrams talks about, I never liked Star Trek. Too intellectual. I want to make it more like something else. Something like Rise of Skywalker, perhaps? I mean, for fuck's sake, you know what? I would make the people that are going to take over Star Trek, I would fucking audition them. I would get a group of people. I'm not saying I should be one of them. I'm saying, well, it would help. But I'm saying that you should audition these people and find out. You better find out these people are fucking passionate. Because if not, Star Trek will not work. Where is your modern audience for Star Trek? Where is it? Are people clamoring for new Star Trek? These people made I'm spitting. I gotta calm down. You know what? I'm going to die ranting about Star Trek on the internet. I swear to God. I'm gonna. No, this is not moonshine. This is ice water. I gotta lose 60 pounds. Or I'm gonna die ranting and raving online about Star Trek. Swear, I will. Let's see what you guys have to say. Let's see if there are any super chats. I'm sure somebody has something to say. Because you always do. Let's see. Warren, 765 for a $20 super chat. Thank you. That's very nice of you. I have a 1980s version of The Wrath of Khan on NBC with commercials. Perhaps the original airing. You haven't seen Wrath of Khan without its original network TV airing. I'll send it your way on DVD. Well, I did watch Wrath of Khan in its original airing, and it had some, extra footage. And which was pretty great. Bale for Teeth said Bale says, these articles filled me with sadness, as they were meant to, but I'm sorry to do that. Filled me with sadness. To me, Star Trek TV and movies died in 2005, and I absolutely miss what it was. Also, I loved your interview with Doug Drexler. Like you, well, thank you. That man is a treasure. Doug Drexler is a treasure. And Ron Moore, although he couldn't admit it, is like Doug Drexler. He was a huge Star Trek fan. And he came in, his first script was The Bonding. And The Bonding wasn't great, but I understand in the third season it was a really great thing. But then, also in the third season, Ron Moore, Sins of the Father. Ron Moore created the entire Klingon mythology. Ron Moore was writing banger episodes. And then you can see where he went on to go. I mean, Ron Moore is, and I got to talk to him a little bit at Star Trek Las Vegas. I saw him at Comic-Con. If you talk to Ron Moore, you can see in his eyes, he has the soul of a real writer. He knows, man. He believes. And his work speaks for itself. And Apple, come on, season 5. Why don't you just renew For All Mankind through season 8? Let him go. You got the Star City spinoff. I mean, you're killing it with science fiction. So let's get season 5 of For All Mankind out. What do I have to do? Do I have to make a call? Fearless Wolf says execs not knowing Star Trek isn't new. DS9's Ira Bear fought the studio nonstop. The real issue now is shows chasing trends instead of protecting the story. That's true. Well, Ira Bear didn't fight the studio so much as he fought Rick Berman. One of my favorite stories that Ira Bear tells in our documentaries is that in the episode Sarek, when they bring back Mark Leonard as Sarek, Picard mind melds with Mark Leonard. That was another thing. When Next Generation brought back, it took him to the 3rd season. DeForest Kelley was in the pilot, but then it took them 3 seasons. You were almost more than 60 episodes in, or a little bit less than 60 episodes, when they brought in a legacy character, and they had a great episode for him. Mark Leonard coming back as Spock's father. Terrific episode. And who was the story by? Peter S. Beagle, a great writer that my former girlfriend, Mary Forrest, turned me on to a story called A Fine and Private Place, which I would love to make into a movie one day. Peter Beagle also wrote The Last Unicorn. But yes, Ira Bear had to fight Rick Berman for one mention of Spock in that episode. One mention. The Brujo says, I harp on about it, but Pike is ruined in Disco and Strange New Worlds because of Ariam. Oh, she's a full-blown cyborg after a shuttle crash. Pike's going to be fine. Yes. Well, the funny thing is the writers who are currently writing Star Trek, their idea that it's a non-military structure, even though everybody has ranks, is silly. And that's why, the military ranking, there's no military discipline on that show. They didn't really think through. They've got all the series regulars just congregating in Pike's cabin while he cooks them meals. That's not how it would work. So that's part of the verisimilitude for me. And also the horrible scripts and the people that have apparently never read a science fiction novel in their lives and think Star Trek is dumb. Kelvin Wellborn has been all the way down. He's my man down under. Kelvin got me a box set of UFO, another great TV series that's way better than modern Star Trek. Scott Bartholomew says post-2019 Trek sans Picard Season 3 is devoid of verisimilitude. I'll say. And again, this is something that Star Trek had going for it. You had a universe with a history. And if you're gonna delve into the Star Trek universe, look at that as a strength. You don't have to interact with people that have come before. You can create a whole new cast of characters. And you know who did that? Oh, I don't know. Star Trek The Next Generation. Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Star Trek Voyager gave us kind of an amalgamation of characters. But Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek, especially Deep Space Nine, the cast of Deep Space Nine, you've got Starfleet officers, but by the time that was gone, by the time it left after its 7th season, what you leave behind, you had Ferengi characters, you had Cardassian characters, you had Federation characters, you had the Changeling characters, you had so many, fucking Salome Jens was cast as the leader of the Changelings. Salome Jens, who starred in Frankenheimer's Seconds with Rock Hudson. My God, the people that made Deep Space Nine knew what was up. And then you had characters like Martok and the whole cast, man. The whole cast. I'm telling you, what happened? You can't make a movie. And the TV shows that are being made, what's really interesting right now is they have to finish, I guess contractually, they have to finish season 4 and 5 of Strange New Worlds, the 2nd season of Starfleet Academy. And oh boy, Can't wait for that. That looks great. But anyway, we'll see. Warren, is that Warren 1765 says, "You are our spirit animal. We adore you. Free Enterprise 2. Listen, I just want to get Free Enterprise 1 out in 4K. For those of you who don't know, Free Enterprise is a movie that I directed, co-wrote, and edited that has been out of print since 2006. You can find it around, but it's never been remastered in HD, and I want to do a final definitive version of it. Our executive producer, Mark Gottwald, who made the movie possible, is sitting on it, and we're trying to convince him to let us have it and put it out. I think I would love to get my film out for two reasons. One, I think fans would enjoy it, and two, they would definitely try and cancel me, which would always be amusing. Because there's a lot of things, as somebody once said, I say things that people are afraid to say. Let's see, Tej Sangani, I think I got it right. I hope you're enjoying the Star Trek Mego toys. Oh, Tej sent me the whole range of Mego Star Trek the Motion Picture figures. He's also going to be joining the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And I don't know if I should say this. He may or may not have been on an episode of Strange New Worlds. Maybe. Upcoming. Can't confirm or deny that. You'd have to ask Tej. He says, hope you're enjoying the Star Trek Mego toys. My RCMP departure is postponed to January 3rd now. Big Strange New Worlds episode 505 spoiler. Wait a minute. Are you really giving me... Okay, I can't say that. As much as I rant and rave, I can't say. I asked Tej about something because he explained to me where he was. I will say this. It has something to do with Captain Kirk's past. And I'm not going to say anything more about it. But that's really interesting, what you told me. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to ruin anyone's enjoyment of Strange New Worlds. I don't want to be that guy. But that's really interesting, Tej. Is it Tej? And thank you for those figures. That was great. Let's see. Kelvin Wellborn says, seems like most legacy sci-fi series are being reinvented by writers who think they know better than the original creators. Well, that's what I don't understand. I mean, I understand why people are doing that. But, we've seen Doctor Who. They've fundamentally, the Timeless Children. Why? First of all, Doctor Who history should be immutable, even though you're time traveling. And then somebody has... I like RDJ. And is it RDJ? Richard? RJD? No. Davies, look, I loved Torchwood Children of Earth. I think it's 5 of the greatest hours of televised science fiction, and I had never watched the Torchwood series. I had a man crush on Captain Jack from Doctor Who, but it was incredible. Incredible. And if you've never seen Torchwood Children of Earth, do yourself a favor, but put aside 5 hours because I guarantee you're going to not want to stop. I started watching it. I made a mistake. I was working on Star Trek and on the Blu-ray documentaries, and I came home one night at 1 a.m. and I got the disc in, and somebody told me it was good, and I want to have a little whiskey and unwind after the day, and I put in the first episode to give it a little taste. By the first 10 minutes, I'm like, I'm fucking in. I watched that shit till 6 a.m, and then I took a little cat nap and went back to work. It was so good. Children of Earth is so good. The Torchwood series is really hit and miss, but Torchwood, Children of Earth, and then what was Miracle Day? Miracle Day, Torchwood Miracle Day is kind of like modern Star Trek. Although I like the characters. But I think, most legacy shows... Here's the problem. When you have a show that's running 50 years or something, like Star Trek, people want to reinvent it and make it modern because they think that it's old and they need to update it. What they should really be thinking about is if you work on a series like a Star Trek or like a Doctor Who, I've always thought of Star Trek, it has a history. If you think about it, and here's the problem with modern Star Trek is completely, somebody at Paramount needs to have a decree and say that all of this gobbledygook since 2009, all of it is not part of the Prime timeline. That Star Trek from 66 to 2005 is its own timeline. Everything else is outside. And you have to tell all the people at Memory Alpha to put all that shit into a different place. The fact that they've got these entries, it drives me berserk. It's not helpful. They've got to do that. It would make your franchise better, because all this mediocre work you would not have to explain what they did with Balance of Terror and Strange New Worlds, and the fact that Khan has a descendant. The fact that Khan has a descendant on Earth, I mean, that just doesn't make any sense, and it completely diminishes the story of Khan. I mean, not only, I mean, imagine if Khan, Noonien Singh ran a quarter of the world at one point, which he did in the 90s during the eugenics wars, and then he left to space in a gigantic war. Do you think that his followers, the whole point was that they couldn't allow these genetic supermen to exist. So, and to think that same bloodline would travel for 300 years, give me a break. This is a failure this is where verisimilitude falls to the ground. I'm sure Akiva Goldsman slammed his Oscar on the table and said, I've got an idea. I want to have a Khan. I mean, so when Spock runs into Khan Noonien Singh and they don't know him in Space Seed, they just ruin the original series. That's all they do. They just ruin the original series. If they were great, if I got Pluribus levels of writing, if I got Black Mirror levels of writing, if I got For All Mankind levels of writing in the new Star Trek shows, I'd be like, okay, but we don't. We get a lot of stupid shit thrown at us and we're supposed to believe in it. Christina Chong deserved better. Why should she be a Khan Noonien Singh descendant? Give her an original character. Better yet, create original alien race we've never met before. And it's okay because there's lots of alien races. And everyone says, well, how could we have never met this alien race before? Because it's a big fucking universe. We haven't met everybody. I mean, there's a lot of aliens in Star Trek the Motion Picture we've never really seen again. The Arcturians. Doesn't matter if it's Arcturian, baby. But, but that's the thing. So, a successful Star Trek movie. Bring the budget down. No big budgets. No... If you get past 125 million, you've failed. Because what you need to do is focus on character and story. Tell a compelling... if you want to tell a great Star Trek story, don't look at Star Wars. Look at something else. It's like, nowadays, they don't even look at what Kurosawa looked at for Star Wars, which was like... Seven Samurai, or of course Hidden Fortress, Throne of Blood. I mean, Kurosawa was looking at Shakespeare. If you want to make a great Star Wars story, go into classic literature. That's one of the things about the Eric Jedrinson Star Trek The Beginning script. He's quoting the Iliad and the Odyssey, talking about that's the kind of story he wanted to tell. Well, there you go. That would be really interesting. The Trojan War in space, although to be fair, that would be expensive. Tell us a story. Look at something from, whether it's antiquity, look at a classic. Game of Thrones was based on the War of the Roses. Game of Thrones, even though it was expensive, it was all character. That's what you need to do. Look at how exciting Pluribus is. Now, Pluribus, admittedly, is a very expensive TV show, but it's a compelling story, and that there's not a bunch of shit blowing up. One of the great Star Trek episodes, one of the great Deep Space Nine episodes from the first season is Duet. Watch Duet. There's a great Star Trek episode. Look at the bottle shows. Look at both Doomsday Machine and the Immunity Syndrome. Immunity Syndrome uses the music from Doomsday Machine. But watch those two stories. Watch those two episodes. Look, I understand some of the effects are a little wonky. I get it. But look at the pathos. Those are bottle episodes of Star Trek. They take place entirely on standing sets. Watch that. Learn from that. The same is true of Balance of Terror. Look at that. The people that are looking at Star Trek are looking at the wrong episodes. Don't look at your BuzzFeed episode list. Top 10 episodes of Star Trek. Don't look at that shit. Listen to your Uncle Bob here. Go look at the episodes I tell you to look at. Journey to Babel. Another bottle episode. I mean, that's got familial conflict. Star Trek has such great writing. When it was cooking with gas. And the people that are making modern Star Trek don't seem to know any of these things. Or they can't get past the production design, or they just won't do the homework. And it's very obvious. The fact that you can't come up with a great Star Trek script. I mean, how about this, people? You want to look at a great movie that will tell you how to make a Star Trek film? Look at Master and Commander. Again, coming from books like Horatio Hornblower. But you look at Master and Commander, that's a Star Trek movie. Why is it that Star Trek doesn't affect people the way Interstellar does? Young people love Interstellar. You make a movie like Interstellar and you set that in the Star Trek universe, there's where your audience comes from. Now, people are going to say, Rob, Interstellar is very expensive. I understand. It's Christopher Nolan. I get it. But it's the pathos. I mean, imagine telling a Star Trek story with time dilation, everything that they did in that movie. Imagine that movie set in the Star Trek universe with a whole new cast of characters that you haven't met. Interstellar is a Star Trek movie. It is. That's what you look at. That's what you go, okay, it's as far away from Star Trek 09 as it can be. But if you want to make a Star Trek movie that's good, don't look at Star Wars. Don't try and make it an action franchise. That's not what Star Trek is. You want fucking people making reaction videos when they start crying when the wave comes in Interstellar. That's what Star Trek should be. When you see the accretion disk of a singularity, whatever, we want to see that in Star Trek movies. That's what Star Trek is. It's not hard. It's not hard, but how much money has been spent over the last 9 years trying to make a Star Trek movie? Because you don't have people that are passionate. Look, you're going to give somebody a job at a studio to make a multi-million-dollar franchise. You wouldn't give them that job. You think they're going to say no? Of course they're going to take the job. But you know what? Unless people are bringing stuff up like Interstellar to you, don't hire them. You've got to hire people that have read books. Ask them what their top 10 favorite science fiction novels are. Ask them. And they can't be novelizations, and they can't be extended universe books. They've got to be real sci-fi books. And they can't be, Dune doesn't count. Or 2001 doesn't count. If they've made a movie of it, it doesn't count. Doesn't count. That's how you make a great Star Trek movie. I want to make the Interstellar of the Star Trek franchise. That's what you want to hear. Now, I don't know if there's anybody on Earth that's capable of doing that. I'm not even saying I'm capable of doing that. I've never worked. I've made one movie. I mean, and the movies I produced, I haven't worked at that level. I couldn't do it myself. I mean, to be fair, I could do it. But, you know, no one's going to give me that job. If I made 2 or 3 more movies first, maybe. I mean, hell, maybe. I mean, Colin Trevorrow made Safety Not Guaranteed for $1 million and then directed Jurassic World. And I'll tell you one thing. I could do better than all the people that they've hired to make Star Trek in the last 9 years. I'll tell you that. I'd walk in and sell my pitch as soon as I walked in that room. I'd probably work. And by the way, you know what I don't understand? Do you know what Paramount has? I don't know if they would do it. Do you know what Paramount has, which I just don't get? Do you know who loves Star Trek? Chris fucking McQuarrie. McHugh. Academy Award winning McHugh. Why not make Tom Cruise the captain of a Federation starship and do that movie? Because Chris McQuarrie, look, I know the last 2 Mission Impossible movies, I know, but he won an Academy Award. He won an Academy Award for writing Usual Suspects. He made the first Reacher movie. You know, he made Way of the Gun. Chris McQuarrie, Tom Cruise, and you tell them, Tom, no $400 million, man. You make that movie for $125 million and you show them you can do it. You do it quick. You do it like they would do a TV show. You shoot that fucker in 45 days. $125 million. Tom Cruise, Chris McQuarrie. You make that movie? That's the Star Trek movie you want to make because Chris McQuarrie would write you a great Star Trek script. And Tom Cruise, Captain Cruise. Come on. That's the movie you should make. If you really Paramount, why not make movies with people who've already made you a lot of money? And you tell them to make, and then you do the Les Grossman movie. But why not? McHugh and Cruise. Cruise on the bridge of the Enterprise as a captain. And you know what? You give him, it's not in Ethan Hunt mode. You bring him back. You do. Cruise would really get to act. Give him an incredible moral and ethical conundrum. You know, put him in a courtroom. You know, do that. You can't handle the truth. Did you order the code red? Can you imagine him saying, "Red alert"? Tom Cruise, man. But make that after the F1 movie. But make it after when he comes back as Cole Trickle and Joe Kosinski does F1 2, you know, Legends of Thunder. That's what I said they should do. Make it after that. They make F1 together. Brad Pitt and Cruise make F1. Give McQuarrie time to write a banger of a script. You come back and you make Star Trek for $125 million. You put Tom Cruise in a Star Trek movie that Chris McQuarrie writes and directs. You make it for a price. That is going to be your top grossing Star Trek movie of all time. Do it. Tom Cruise, I bet Tom Cruise would do it, and you do it fast. You do it the way they made Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, TV style. Get a TV producer. Get your favorite TV producer to come in and produce the fucking thing. That's what you do. Anyway, I'm rambling. I am rambling. I'm totally rambling. Ian Carroll says, I always had the idea for a reboot cast film that was the Doomsday Machine meets TNG's Tin Man, where Kirk would have to contend with the Klingons trying to take control of the Doomsday Machine. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Darth Plato says, hey, Rob, member call, yay or nay? This Saturday, yes, member call, on, for sure, I hope. And then Sunday, by the way, is the 5th anniversary show of Let's Get Physical Media. Let's see, I think I've got everyone. You know what? I should end the show because I'm rambling. I'm babbling. I've said my piece. Now, I think the two guys they hired, there is the potential for them to do a great Star Trek movie, but here's my fear. I love Dungeons & Dragons. I do. I don't think making a Dungeons & Dragons type Star Trek movie is a great idea. I don't. I think you need to make the Interstellar Star Trek movie. Brand new we didn't know any of those characters. You know, and there's another person, Jonathan Nolan. If you actually read Jonathan Nolan's, if you can find it online, read Jonathan Nolan's original script for Interstellar. It didn't have any of that weird gobbledygook in her bookcase or, oh, it's the Fourth Dimension's love or whatever. No, you'll know it's the Jonathan Nolan draft because the Chinese have beat them to the planet. It's really interesting. The Chinese are in it. But Project Hail Mary, Star Trek movie. You know, The Martian, Star Trek movie. Interstellar. These are the movies that people should be citing when you're talking Star Trek. Chris McQuarrie knows that. Tom Cruise would totally be on board with that. You know, what you want is the Tom Cruise that gave that speech to the Academy. That guy making that speech, and go look it up online. He gave it, last night, 2 nights ago? You look at that speech and you tell me, you put Star Trek words in that guy's mouth that he wouldn't be a great starship captain. Tom fucking Cruise in the center seat. $125 million. Chris McQuarrie writing and directing. I mean, hell, Top Gun Maverick. Well, it's more of a Star Wars movie, but, you know, Maverick is a seasoned starship commander? Come on, man. Make that shit happen, Skydance. Why not? Seriously. That's what you need to do. That's what Star Trek, that will bring Star Trek back. What you have done up until now has not worked, as evidenced by all of the articles I read. Anyway, I'm going to end this show. You'll see me back on the John Campea show tomorrow. John will still be traveling the highways and byways of the land. You can go see our little movie at whitedevilsthemovie.com. If you go there, I'd really appreciate it. We're going to take it down soon. It's a special preview for people on the internet that know about it because I'm telling you about it. We'll have more information about a theatrical release that's going to be happening early in 2026. I'll have that to tell you about. Please, my audio drama, truenoir.co. By the way, if you think I talk mad shit, at least I have stuff that you can look at that I've made or had a hand in making, and you can tell me if I know what I'm doing or not. I would put up True Noir against any other audio drama you've ever heard. And I say that humbly because I didn't write it. Max Allan Collins wrote, he gifted me with a wonderful script. We cast great actors thanks to my producer, Christine Sheeks. I just took all the elements that I was able to gather together and make them into something, but I didn't do it alone, and I had great people working on it. People that are way more talented than me, but I had the talent to know to go get them. So there you go. Tom Cruise, Chris McQuarrie, make it happen. Not that these guys shouldn't be given a shot, but you know what? Remember, the Star Trek universe should be seen as a real place that has a real history. Real. Go there and do it. Make it happen. Otherwise, you're going to just try and reinvent Star Trek again, and it's not going to work. Although, fingers crossed, if they're really going to make this Star Trek movie, didn't say anything about the script, but if they're really going to make something, and maybe they're far enough along, but we've heard it before. And on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. You'll be seeing more of me doing these shows. Tonight I was fired up. See what happens to me when I talk about Star Trek? I get possessed. Possessed! Because I'm angry. I love Star Trek. I'm just saying. And on that note, live long and prosper. I have killed my captain. I shall do neither. Where does that come from?